Senhor Mohamed Ansari, vice-presidente da Índia, meu caro
Vice President of India, my dear friend Prime Minister Singh, Madam Sonia Gandhi, who is the chairperson of Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Fund and president of the Indian National Congress Party, Dr. Karan Singh, vice president of the Memorial Fund, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and an honor to once again be received by this great country. When I was the president of Brazil, from 2003 until 2010, I had the privilege of strengthening the relations between our peoples. We were able to expand trade, investments, and bilateral cooperation in the fields of technology, culture, health, and education. We worked together, both India and Brazil, in various multilateral fora. We defended common positions at the United Nations, at the World Trade Organization, and at the Conference on Environment and Climate Change, always striving to establish what we considered more equitable and balanced relations between countries. We consolidated institutional relations with India, and through the BRICS and IPSA, added forces with South Africa, China, and Russia. We have established a solid friendship, of which Brazil is very proud of. I meet you again, now as a former president, but as a permanent enthusiast of the closeness and cooperation between our peoples. Ladies and gentlemen, India occupies a unique place in the history of humanity. Over time, your country has contributed to the cultural and spiritual uplifting of men and women worldwide. India today contributes strongly to knowledge and progress in cutting-edge areas, pharmaceutical research, information technology, the aerospace industry, to name some of these few sectors. This extraordinary country has also become one of the most strongest democracies today, where today, in harmony, 1,200,000,000 people live together. This construction is the result of the struggle and perseverance of an entire generation that was consolidated and perfected by those who succeeded it. It has its origins in the struggle for independence, when India was unified under the doctrine of nonviolence through peaceful but firm civil disobedience and against the colonizer. The inspirer of this doctrine, Mahatma Gandhi, has attracted the world's attention by the coherence of principles and loyalty to the cause of his people. A century after having set out his journey, Gandhi remains as a symbol of moral integrity and an example of love of justice for all the world. Side by side, Gandhi, there was always the political leader who rightly is considered the founder of the modern Indian democratic state that we have today. Jawaharlal Nehru was, in fact, a guide dedicated to his people. His ideal of nation was based on the social development of the most humble sections of the population. He fought hunger and poverty, promoted economic growth, and improved the living standards for those that were more in want, which was something remarkable considering the size of the Indian population.
Foi
He
precursor
was
do
a
modelo de
pioneer of the
desenvolvimento
sustainable
econômico
economic development
com
model
inclusão social
with social inclusion
tantos países
that many
perseguem
countries pursue
hoje.
today.
5 anos atrás,
5 years ago,
tive a honra de
I had the
receber
honor
aqui
of receiving
o prêmio
the
Jawaharlal Nehru.
Jawaharlal Nehru Award
Recordo
here. I recall
algumas palavras que
some of the
disse na
words I
ocasião.
said on that
Abre
occasion.
aspas.
Quote,
Nehru
Nehru
lançou os fundamentos
led
para a
the
construção de uma
foundation for
nação
building
mais
a more
justa e
just
igualitária.
and equalitarian
Sua
nation.
política externa
His independent foreign policy
independente elevou a
made
Índia a um lugar
India
de destaque
earn
na
a
comunidade
prominent
internacional.
place in the international community.
defesa
His
da solução
advocacy
pacífica
of
dos
peaceful
conflitos
settlement of
E do
disputes
direito à
and the right to
autodeterminação
self-determination
foi sempre
was
fonte de
always a
inspiração
source of inspiration
para os povos
for people
que buscam
that were
dignidade.
seeking dignity.
Fecha aspas.
Unquote. Now,
Na circunstância de
in
hoje,
present-day
percebo
circumstances,
com mais
I
clareza
realize even more
a
clearly
relevância histórica
the historical
de
relevance
líderes comunistas.
of leaders like Nehru.
A seu tempo,
In his time,
ele ousou
he
desafiar a
dared to
lógica
defy
política
the political
de um mundo
rationale
bipolar.
of a bipolar
A
world.
iniciativa de criar
The
um
initiative
movimento
to
não
create the
alinhado
non-aligned
Em
movement
1961,
in 1961
abriu uma
opened new
perspectiva
perspectives
nova para as
for
relações
relationships
internacionais.
between countries.
Ao lado do presidente
Along with the
egípcio
Egyptian
Nasser,
President Gamal
do
Abdel
líder
Nasser
Yugoslavo
and with the
Tito,
Yugoslav leader Joseph
estabeleceu
Tito,
contraponto
Nehru established a
aos
counterpoint
dois blocos
to the two
políticos
military political
da Guerra
blocs
Fria.
of the Cold War.
Os não alinhados
The
propugnavam
non-aligned
respeito à
advocated
autodeterminação dos
respect for
povos, a
self-determination,
não intervenção, a
non-intervention,
coexistência
peaceful
pacífica e a
coexistence,
cooperação
and
para o
cooperation for development.
Apesar das contradições
Despite
inerentes
the contradictions inherent to a movement that brought together 155 countries from all continents, history has to do justice to this great effort for peace by the non-allied countries. Notwithstanding the differences between the current situation and that of 50 years ago,
fundamental
it is essential to recognize that the principles of the movement remain fair and valid even today.
continua atual.
What
Acima de
remains
tudo,
strikingly relevant above all
ousado
is Nehru's audacious nonconformity.
poeta
The
Tagore,
poet Tagore said,
onde o espírito não teme,
quote, "Where the mind is without fear, the head is held high."
aprendemos com Nehru,
End of quote. Today's challenges also require a new attitude, assertive and bold, as we learned from Nehru.
senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen,
vivemos momento
we live
de
in a
grande
time of great perplexity.
As consequências da
The
crise
impact of the financial global crisis that peaked in 2008 is still being felt in the wealthiest economies, with harmful consequences for the global trade and the economic activity of all countries.
a recessão
The
da Europa
recession in Europe
é uma realidade
is a reality technically
constatada
verified
pelo resultado do
by the
PIB,
GDP results, which fell by
de acordo com o Banco Central Europeu.
0.1% in the third quarter, according to the European Central Bank. It's the second consecutive quarterly decline of the GDP in Europe. The economic downturn is being felt most heavily by the more vulnerable countries in the Eurozone, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy, among others.
Vemos com expectativa sinais de recuperação
Signs of
nos Estados
recovery
Unidos.
are being to be seen in the U.S., and we hold high expectations, and we sincerely hope that in his second term, President Barack Obama will find better conditions to resume economic
Mas o
growth.
preço da crise
But the price of the
tem
crisis
sido cobrado ao
has been
redor
paid
de todo o mundo.
around the world.
Centenas de bilhões
Hundreds
de euros
of
e
billions
dólares
of dollars and euros were spent
para salvar os
to
bancos da
bail
Europa,
out banks in
nos
Europe
Estados Unidos,
and in the U.S.
enquanto milhões de mutuários
While
norte-americanos e de pensionistas
nothing was done
europeus
to help millions of American borrowers, European pensioners,
tiveram seus
and
empregos destruídos.
were left at their own luck, and those who had their jobs destroyed in all countries. On the contrary, the orthodox recipe of austerity have been imposed on governments that have nothing else to cut.
Austeridade pura e simples
Austerity, pure and
tem
simple,
demonstrado
has proven to be not only a bitter recipe, but an ineffective remedy. The recession in the Eurozone, which I have mentioned, was the predictable result. It is painful to watch hopelessness take over, especially among the younger section of the population. Despite the training they have received in schools and universities, these young people cannot find good jobs, nor envision a better future for them. Alongside hopelessness, we note with concern the increasing symptoms of xenophobia, intolerance, and ethnic prejudice growing in these countries. The prospects look even bleaker if we find that nothing was done to correct structural errors, which are the root causes of the crisis. On the 2008 global financial crisis emerged in an environment of irrationality as rarely seen before. Financial speculation has exceeded all limits under the complacency of a deliberately deregulated system. The billions invested initially to protect the financial system caused a flood of liquidity. Eventually, this affected the entire exchange market, leading to inflation and instability in other countries. In 2009, the G20 countries reached an agreement on a package of measures to regulate the financial system. But almost nothing, or very little, has concretely been done in this direction. The recently announced European financial mechanism is a positive initiative, but came late, because we know that for the cost of any help will be infinitely greater than if it had been done in the early stages of the crisis. This means that some effects were addressed, but not the root causes of the latest crisis. It is as though the drug had caused a new disease. Ladies and gentlemen, I recall here a sentence from Nehru, absolutely valid for the moment that we are living. He said, quote, "Crises and deadlocks, when they occur, have at least this advantage. They force us to think," end of the quote. This crisis has allowed us to think and understand very clearly that it is essential to sign a new compact between governments and multilateral institutions. The markets definitely does not have the magic wand to regulate itself as many have imagined. The moment requires more than just austerity measures and bank bailouts. It requires concerted political action among countries with the definition of a new agenda. It requires a development policy to encourage the potential of each region in the world and put them on a path leading to sustained growth. It demands reviewing protectionist barriers that prevent poor or emerging nations from expanding their exports to rich nations. Mechanisms are necessary to avoid speculation in international financial markets and the resulting instability in commodity markets. As I have said, this new regulation demands common action in a bold and assertive manner. Fair and lasting solutions will only be built with the participation of emerging countries, which constitute a new dynamic axis of the global economy. The International Monetary Fund report released in April of this year shows that the economies of developing countries will together surpass the GDP of the most developed nations. The world political order must necessarily reflect this new reality, and not of the balance of power at the end of World War II.
Não é razoável
And it's not reasonable for the UN Security Council to not have any country from Latin America or Africa or a country so important as India among its permanent members. It's not likewise unreasonable for international financial institutions to keep ignoring the new economic dynamics, very different from the days of Bretton Woods. It's not even minimally reasonable to continue ignoring the need to support the development of poorer countries of the world and create opportunities for the excluded, which make up the majority of the population. The continued existence of an environment of crisis and its structural causes is not of the interest of anyone, not even to the rich countries. Ladies and gentlemen, overcoming the crisis requires a new cycle of sustainable development. The key word for this new cycle will be inclusion. Inclusion of poor countries, inclusion of marginalized populations. In my country, this was the path that led us to sustainable development in the last 10 years. For the first time, the poor were not seen as a problem, but they started to be seen as part of the solution. For the very first time, Brazil has grown at consistent rates, sharing the benefits with the majority of the population. We had the prudence to reclaim and strengthen the foundations of economic stability, but we rejected the orthodoxies and the fashionable idea of the minimum state or government. On the contrary, we strengthen the most positive aspects of the state government. Good regulation, which encourages productive investment, promoting the ability to plan and invest in infrastructure, and especially the ability to maintain comprehensive and effective public policies. The income transfer programs that were initiated in 2003 today reaches 60 million Brazilians. Our policy of enhancing wages guaranteed increases above inflation. The increase of payroll and the salary mass, coupled with the Bolsa Família and the income of the retirees, greatly strengthened the domestic market by creating a new and positive economic dynamics. We also, with great care, we expanded and democratized access to credit, which grew fourfold and today stands at more than $1.4 trillion, or that is to say, 51% of the Brazilian GDP. We developed electricity for all program that took energy to 3 million households in the countryside and in the Amazon rainforest, bringing benefit to 3 million people that were living under candle lights. 5 years ago, we launched the Accelerated Growth Program, the PAC acronym in Portuguese, which promoted around $300 billion in public and private investments for infrastructure. And thanks to this, to the combination of these policies, Brazil was able to deal with and overcome the crisis when its impacts were felt in 2008. When the banks, when we mobilized state-owned banks, when credit dried up to help the development of the country, we were able to adopt anti-cyclical policies that allowed us to confront the crisis, and Brazil came out of the crisis bigger and better. Today, we are the 6th largest economy of the world with a GDP of $2.7 trillion. And if God wishes so, till 2016, we will become the 5th largest economy of the world. In 10 years, since we arrived in government, we have created 17 million new jobs. Between 2000 and 2010, the income of the 50% poorest of the country went up 68%, while the income of the 10% richest went up 10%. That is to say, the income of the poorest grew sixfold than the income of the rich. 28 million Brazilians were lifted from absolute poverty, and other 40 million were lifted to middle social class. It's the largest social mobility ever seen in the history of Brazil. We still have a lot to make progress, but it's easy to see that social inclusion was the key for growth, and that these people, now full citizens, integrated to production and consumption, will incorporate to their rights these new achievements. Ladies and gentlemen, I talk about the experience in Brazil, but I know very well that a similar path is being followed by India, each one doing it their own way according to their own reality. We know that we need more plants and more agricultural production. We need to build more hydroelectrical power plants, more highways, more railroads, but above all, more schools. We need more scientists, and we need more researchers. India and Brazil, they need to open space so that other developing nations can be able to continue to grow, to diminish the inequalities, and to include millions of new consumers. This is the path that is essential to rebalance the world economy and to keep peace. Without peace, as Nehru said, all other dreams vanish and are reduced to ashes. End of quote. My dear friends, I would like to close my speech now, renewing my trust in building a new global governance, an order that will be more balanced, more just, and with more democracy, built with the spirit of fraternity and mutual respect to the peoples of all the world. This is what the world is expecting from its leaders, and that the role model that Nehru meant, that dared to think and act towards the direction of a better world, continue to inspire all of us. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.